In this demo, we'd like to show how we can use the aggregation pattern in Camel. So let's start by creating a new Fuse project. We will use the Java domain-specific language in order to implement it. Let's give the group ID as demo, and the artifact ID should be aggregation. Okay. So now that we have our project built with Maven, we can go inside the project. Let's rename this to main application. Okay, it's renaming the main application. And okay, so that's fine. And we also rename the router to be called main route builder. Basically, we'd like to read a file and do some aggregation with the values in the file, and then to change the format of the result. So let's say that we have an input file, and I will create a folder for that. Let's call the folder data, and in here we have to basically we don't need an input and an output, but let's create an in folder and an out folder for that. And in the in folder, I would like to have a file with all the cities in Romania, and I will just create in here a new CSV file. So I'll just create a new file called cities.csv. It will try to open it with Excel, but I don't like it, so I will change the default editor. Actually, I don't change the default editor, but rather I will open it with a different editor. And now I'm just pasting some values here with details from Wikipedia about cities in Romania. First is the ID of the field, then the name of the district, the name of the city, and the total number of inhabitants. Okay, so let's create a model in order to deserialize it from this CSV file. So I'll just create a class here called city, and as you saw previously, we have an ID for the city, we have the name of the city, also we have the district, and I think this district comes first. No, so the first is the name of the city, then the district. Okay, and then we have an integer, which is the total number of inhabitants. Okay, so this is our model. I just create getters and setters for the fields, and you know what? I think we only need getters. I don't think we will set the values, but we'll let the deserializer to do that. So I'll just select getters, and let's put the getters as the last member in the class. And now that we have generated the getters, let's focus on deserializing this. In order to deserialize the CSV, we will use bindy. So we'll go to our project object model, we'll go to the dependencies, and we need to define a property for the version of the runtime. So we copy the version, we go to the overview, we create a camel.version property with the appropriate value, and now we go to the dependencies and we will update this as well. So this should be camel.version, and we'll use for the tests the same property for the version. Okay, so I edited wrong, I misspelled this, so sorry for that. Nevertheless, now when we save, it will be able to do the build, but then we need to add a new dependency to a component from Camel, so that means that it will have as group ID the org apache.camel. The name of the component, it's bindy, and of course it will have the same version, but this time I have a wrong variable in my clipboard. Okay, so now when I added bindy as a dependency, I'm able to annotate my model in order to deserialize it with bindy. Basically what we do, we will say that this is a CSV record, and I need to specify for this the separator. In my case it's the comma, but I also need to specify how the new line should be interpreted. So this would be a Windows style because I'm running on Windows 7 here. Okay, so I need to specify which are the fields that need to be set by the deserializer. So I will annotate this as being a data field, and the position in the data source would be 1. So this will be the first field. This is the second one. Now we have the third one, and of course the fourth one. Okay, so now that I have my model annotated accordingly to bindy, I can define my route. So my route will actually read the file from within the data folder. So I will just say read the file from data/in, because here I have a file, and this is actually expecting to read from a directory, but I would like to say don't read directory, rather read from a file. So I will specify the file name, which is cities.csv, and then, because by default the file component will erase the file and after reading the content, I need to say please don't take any operation on this. So I set no operation to true. This means that the component will only read the file but will not delete it from the file system. Then I like to unmarshal this, and I will use bindy to unmarshal the file. I'd like to, when I deserialize, I have to specify which type of format I would have. So in my case, bindy can handle CSV fixed format and key value pairs. So I'm having not a property file like a key value pair, but a CSV file. And I'd like to deserialize it with CT. So this is my model. Okay. So now I have the file deserialized. Because I'd like to be able to aggregate all the files from within a district and to count the total number of inhabitants of a district, I'd like first to split, because when I read the file I will get a list of cities, but I'd like to take each city at a time and group them together by the district, and of course count the total number of inhabitants from that file, from that cities. Okay, so I do a split on the body which contains a list, and then for each file inside I will set the district accordingly, because I would like to group them by the district. So I set a header with the name district. Okay, I should spell it correctly, so district, and the value for that I will use the simple language to extract a value from the body. And because the body would be a city and the city has a property called district, I will just say, you know what, add a header with the value of this property from within the body, from within the city. And now I'd like to aggregate those on the header with the value district. When the Camel will do the aggregation, it will ask me for an aggregation strategy that will be invoked for each element that comes in this route. So I'll create a new district aggregation strategy and district aggregation strategy. Okay, and I will create this class. The class should implement the aggregation strategy interface, which has a method aggregate that receives an old exchange and a new exchange. Okay, and when I aggregate this, I will need to specify how this should complete. So I have different options to define the completion. If I'm using a component which is reading in batches, like for instance the file component, but this doesn't apply to my scenario. But normally when I take a batch of files and I would like to aggregate the result, I can use the completion from batch consumer predicate. Normally this means that the adapter, the component itself, would set a header with a value counting the total number of files in the batch. It's not the case for me because although this component is setting this value, the value would be the number of files that were read, but actually because I'm reading a file and not a directory, would be the number of lines that were read from the file. So this doesn't apply because I won't have the same number of districts as the number of lines in the data source. Another option to complete would be a completion interval. That means that from time to time that is specified by the completion interval predicate, I will let through this go through this route a message. A more flexible way to specify how the aggregation should finish would be a predicate that's evaluated each time an aggregation is done. Okay, so this would be a way to control for each processing exchange if the aggregation should finish or not. Another option would be to set the completion size. That means that I know for sure I will have a given amount of messages and exchanges, and I will finish the route, I will finish the aggregation in the route as far as, when I will reach this number. And I can give the completion size in two ways, either by an expression which is able to evaluate the size for each exchange that's going to be aggregated, or as a fixed number if I know it in the beginning. Other option would be to do an aggregation by the timeout, and in my case, because I didn't set anything as being countable, or I don't like to implement a complex predicate for that, I would just say let's aggregate them with a timeout of 1 second. That's in milliseconds, so that's 1 second. But then when I finish the aggregation, I will then serialize the result. But first of all, let's implement the aggregation strategy, and then we will take care about serializing the result. So I have to implement the district aggregation strategy, which is gonna actually count how many cities, not actually how many cities, but how many citizens, how many inhabitants I have for each district. So first of all, I will need to define a model in order to represent the district. So I'll just go here and create a new class. Let's call this class a district. Of course, the district would have a name, so it would have a string name. It's gonna have a total number of inhabitants, which will be an integer, and I can create my constructor. So I'll just go and generate it. So I go to source, generate constructor using fields. I'm gonna select only the name because in the beginning I don't know how many inhabitants I will have for the district. So now I have my constructor with only one field. Now I'll just add the getters for my fields. So I'll go to source and create getters and setters, select only getters as being the last member. And I know for sure I'm gonna aggregate cities to this. So let's just add a new void method, call it add city inhabitants. It will receive as parameter a city, and the effect will be that it will count the number of inhabitants in the city. So I'll just add this to the total number of inhabitants in the district. Okay, that's quite obviously. Now, speaking about how we should do the aggregation. So basically, the aggregation goes like this. You see that in my route, when I aggregate, I set an expression for the grouping condition. In my case, I'm using the header district, which is set for each city. So basically, it goes like this. It will evaluate the exchange and the message within the exchange, the input message, and it will compute the value for this aggregation expression. And based on this, it will create subclasses. It will create classes, groups of exchanges. And it will call the district aggregation strategy 2 at the time, with 2 exchanges at a time. So the idea is that I will receive an old exchange, that is the intermediary result of the aggregation, and the new exchange to be aggregated to this group. In the beginning, when a new group is forming, when a new group was found, this will provide an old exchange which is null, and the new exchange that's going to be the first exchange in the group. So what I have to do here is to check whether or not the old exchange is null. If this is null, this means that this is the first time we aggregate a district and we have the city in the new exchange. So all the time, because in my route I have cities sent to this aggregator, in the new exchange, all the time in the input message, I will have in the body of the message a city. So I just extract this as being the current city to be aggregated. So now, for the first element in the grouping, in the group, I have the city to be aggregated to a null exchange. So now I have to say that the new exchange should be the one in which I do the aggregation. So it goes like this. I need to create a district. Okay, so let's create a district. And the district would be a new district. But the name of the district, I know it, it's the name of the district of the city that has to be aggregated to that. Now I call my aggregation to add the number of, I call district to add the number of city inhabitants. And I say this should be aggregated. And then I have to modify the new exchange and get the in message of the exchange and set the body to be the district. And I will return the new exchange. So first, when I need to aggregate, all I have to do is to change the type of the object in the route to be the district, and of course to take into account the number of inhabitants in the current city. Next time, when the aggregator will encounter an exchange with the same value for the grouping expression, it will call the aggregate function of the district aggregation strategy I provided, but that time it will provide the old exchange I previously returned and the current exchange as being the new exchange to be aggregated to that. So all I have to do is to just recover the district I set in the old exchange body. So I get the input message and I get the body of type what I put there, so it's a district.class. Okay, and now I just have to add this current city to that. And I will just return the old exchange all the time from now, because I'd like to have only one exchange aggregating the results. So with this aggregation strategy, sorry, all the time doing, for the first time I create a district and I count the current city, but for all the cities in this group, I'll just recover back the district and count the number of inhabitants of the current city. So this is my aggregation strategy. Now that I have done it, it will complete and it will count all the districts. It will create the districts in my class. So I can log it and let's check how the district looks like. So I will display the district name, but this is not the district, you know for sure, this is the body. So with the body of the message I can display its properties. So I can say this is the name of the district with the number of inhabitants would be the body dot inhabitants, and I have getters for those as well. So now when I'm running this, as okay, I have to run the application, not the route itself, so I run it as a Java application. In the console, okay, it's doing the aggregation. As you can see here, it's outputting all the districts with the name and the total number of inhabitants. So this is for Bucharest and so on. So I have all the values. But in the end, I would like to be able to provide the result as a file and serialize the result. So let's do this as well. Not just displaying the result, but also serializing the result. So I will choose to create an XML file. So in order to use XML, I'll go to the dependencies and add a dependency to org Apache Camel, and I will use JaxB to serialize this. And of course the version will be the same, so the property camel.version. Now when I save it, it will build it with Maven and take the necessary dependencies in order to accommodate this. Okay, so now this is my route, and what I have to do in order to use XML serialization would be to go to my district, okay, and first of all annotate my class. So I would like to say that the accessor type for this class would be the field itself, so I will just go and get the values directly from the field. I'd like to annotate this as an attribute, and I can control the name of the attribute. If I don't put anything here, it would be the name of the field. So the name of the, okay, sorry for using a wrong annotation, so not any attribute, but attribute from XML binding. So the name again of the attribute can be set by this. And of course, I can use another attribute with the appropriate name. In my case, I will just copy the name of the field, but you can control it and put whatever value you like. Because I'm serializing this, although I will do only serialization, it will require on my side to provide a constructor with no parameters at all for the deserialization. So I'll just create a constructor that can be even private, but still need to be without parameters, so should be parameterless. The idea is that I hide it, so I won't be able to create it directly, so that in this case only the formatter will know it and will allow me to serialize this. But what I'd like to have here would be to create only one file for each district. So although I have a list of districts and many exchanges in the route, I need to group them in the second step. Okay, so after completing the first grouping and having all the districts, I need to do a second group. And this time I will aggregate on a constant. I can give whatever value I'd like for the constant. The idea is that for each exchange which will enter the route, which will enter the aggregate component compositing the route, each exchange will have the same value for the aggregation expression. So they will be grouped together. I will create a new aggregation strategy. This time I will call it districts aggregation strategy. Okay, this doesn't exist, so I create a class and it will receive an old exchange as well. This will be an old exchange, and this time I'll have a new exchange, and I will implement this later on. So basically when I do the aggregation, I specify a constant expression, and in this way all the input messages, all the input exchanges will be aggregated to the same result. So I'll have only one exchange going out from the route from this point on. Okay, I'll do the same completion timeout with the same amount of time, and then I'd like to serialize the result. Now, in order to serialize the result, I will call the Marshall composite. This can use a JXB data format. So I'm going to create a new JXB data format, and inside I'll provide a JXB context. So here I will just use a JXB context. Okay, if I spell it correctly, still not correctly, JXB context. And I create a new instance. When I create a new instance of the context, I have to provide the model classes. So for sure I will need to specify the district class, because I need to serialize values from within the district class. This might throw an exception, but also the problem is that this is not routing the result. So it says that the data, the JXB data format was imported from a wrong source, I guess. So actually I'm using the one from Camel. That's the one I should use, but the JXB context and the JXB context is okay. Let me double check it. So it says the constructor is undefined. Let's double check this. So this is the constructor I'd like to have, but it's from the Camel converter. Nevertheless, I can remove the imports, the usings. This one is okay. So I have two locations, either the data format or the JXB itself. If I import it from the data format, it says that the constructor is undefined, no problem. But then if I import it from the JXB context, then it's okay. This can throw an exception, and I will just throw the exception away from the class. Okay, so basically I need to group all the districts in one object, and this object should be annotated accordingly in order to be used by JXB. So I should create a new model class for that, and let's go here and create a district collection class, which will hold a list of districts. Let's call this districts. I need to annotate this. This would be the root of the document, so I'll set the tag as being districts. I also specify the accessor type to be the field itself, so it will just read the value from within the field. I need to create a constructor for this, for the district collection. So the constructor will only instantiate an array list in here. I will have a getter which will return the districts, but I also need to have a method to add a city. Let's call it not collect but add city, and it will have a city as parameter. Okay, so what it does, it will just not a city, sorry, add a district. Sorry for that, we are not adding cities but districts, so we just put the district in the list. Okay, so now when we aggregate all the districts, we will have this list. We need to specify that this is a field that needs to be serialized, so I will just annotate this with XML element. I can control the name of the element to be district. If I do annotate this with an XML element wrapper, then it will group my tags for a district together in another tag. But I don't like to have this because I already have a grouping tag for the root which corresponds to the collection itself. So I will let this ungrouped because the collection itself will do the grouping. So now I have to go here to the aggregation of the districts and say how the districts should be aggregated. And remember that for the first element I will receive an old exchange which is null. If this is null, then I will have to create a district collection. Let's call this districts. I will just create a new district collection. And you know that all the times I will have a district in the new exchange body. So I have to get this from within the input message. I get the body and I know I will have a district in there. Now all I have to do is to call my collection to add this district, and because the old exchange is null, I will have to change the new exchange, and I will set the body of the input message to be the collection of districts, and then returning the new exchange. The second time and so forth, when the aggregate method will be invoked, I will receive an exchange, an old exchange that I returned previously. So in this case, I only have to recover the districts collection from the old exchange body. So I get it in message, get the body as district collection class. Okay, so that's the first step, and then I will just aggregate to these districts by adding the current district and returning the old exchange as well. Old exchange. Okay, so now the aggregation is done, and then if I go to my route, I aggregate this, but I didn't specify to which file to store the result. Okay, so in order to do that, I just route the result to a file with the file component in the data folder, but in the out subfolder. And because I don't like to let Camel generate an ID for the name of the file, I will specify the name myself. So this will be districts.xml. And in case the file already exists, I can specify the behavior if the file exists. Exists, not exists is actually the property, so I'll just say let's override this file. Okay, so now when I run the integration again, run this as a Java application, okay, it's aggregating the districts, and I have an issue, sorry for that. So it seems that I have a problem because the district collection is unknown to the JXB context. So remember that we forgot to do it. So if I go here in my route, yeah, you see that I said let's create a JXB context, and it only knows about the district and not the district collection. So I need also to add this to my serialization, because it will encounter an object of type district collection as being the result of the aggregation. And then when visiting the properties of the district collection, it will find the district inside, and it has to know about that as well. Let's just log here that the processing was done, okay, to know when it will finish. Okay, so let's go here and then run the aggregation again. So then, as you can see, it's aggregating all the districts, and it says that the processing was done. If I refresh the folder in here, you see that I have a districts XML file which contains a districts tag as the route of the file, and as the root, sorry, as the main tag. And in here I have all the districts with the name and the inhabitants as attributes, as I specified them to be. Okay, so that's the way we use aggregation in Camel. Basically, what we have to take care when we do an aggregation would be, first of all, to make sure that if we have one message in the exchange, I mean one message in the route, we will split them in order to be able to aggregate the messages contained by the batch, by the meta message. Then we need to make sure that we have the appropriate information for each message which needs to be used when doing the aggregation. Like for instance, we aggregate based on a property and we make sure that the property is set as a header. Then we implement an aggregation strategy which has to cope with adding 2 exchanges at a time and make sure that we use an appropriate completion mechanism, like for instance a timeout, an interval, a size, number of total messages to be aggregated, or predicate that's more flexible in general and lets us evaluate each time for each exchange if the aggregation is completed or not. And for the strategy, we should take into account the fact that for first element in the group, the old exchange will be null, and then we have to take care that we prepare the body of the new exchange to be the aggregation of the group, and then we return the new exchange for the first time. Next time we will have the old exchange as being what we returned previously, and we just have to take care to recover the information we set in the old exchange and combine that information with the current one from the new exchange, returning the old exchange each time so that we will aggregate the incoming messages, the incoming exchanges to the same exchange for all elements in the group, for all exchanges in the group. You don't have to worry about, for instance, changing the group, because this will be done automatically by the aggregation composite, depending on the value of the aggregation expression. So that's all. Thanks.